just a couple of housekeeping items as well. So again, thanks for joining. We are with Covenant Technology Partners. We're a organization founded since 2004. We are a traditional consulting firm expanding into managed services and software. So we are predominantly Microsoft focused and based, investing heavily in AI, like a lot of folks, and into the data space that Gary will go into as well. We cover in a consulting arena, we cover dynamics, modern work, application development, data and AI, infrastructure security. And then we also handle that in a managed services mode when clients either need the help, don't want to spend their precious resources on those things that we can help them with. And then we also provide software in a reseller mode from Microsoft in a CSP manner, and also some other software as well. Again, heavily investing in AI in addition to that. A couple quick housekeeping items. If you have questions during the webinar, you can either raise your hand or actually type in your questions into chat, and we will monitor those as well. I think that covers a quick things, but again, thanks for joining, and I think a lot of good stuff to come from Mr. Bell, and I'll turn it over to you, Gary.
Great, thanks, Doug, and good morning, everyone. And just to follow on with what Doug had just mentioned there, we've got a small enough group today that please feel free to interrupt or raise your hand with questions. I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as I can. And so in order to leave time for questions, but please don't try to hold those to the end. I think it'll make more sense to bring those up in context of the presentation itself. So, and I'd like this to be a conversation to the extent that it can be. So please let's try to make this interactive. So as Doug was saying, we're going to go through, if I can get my slides to work, we're going to go through AI specifically around powering insights via Power BI and Fabric. And so where I imagine a lot of organizations are at, and you kind of nod your head along in agreement here, hopefully. Power BI has been around long enough now that many organizations have Power BI assets in a variety of workspaces that in some cases are organized, in some cases are a little chaotic. But we want to show off today the ability to take those existing assets, those Power BI semantic models primarily, and enable those to be used in kind of the ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini kind of back and forth natural language interface that's become so popular and so powerful. So we're going to go through a few things. We're going to talk about kind of the out-of-the-box Copilot experiences that you may or may not have seen that are already baked into the environment, kind of how to take advantage of those, what they look like, where you can access those. And then we're going to talk about circling back and figuring out how we can use some of the tools made available via Power BI and Fabric to tweak and tune the kind of responses that your models are going to provide. There's a variety of things that Microsoft makes available kind of within the UI now to kind of guide you through that process. So we'll take a look at what those are and how they can better prepare our models for Power BI, or for Copilot usage. We'll talk briefly about the requirements for Copilot, the licensing stuff. Everybody loves to talk about licensing, so we're going to talk briefly about licensing, just what it takes to kind of get the Copilot features in Power BI or in Fabric. I keep using the terms interchangeably. But what it takes to get this up and running, and what kind of licensing you need behind the scenes and setup, et cetera. And then we'll jump over into one of the more recent additions to Fabric, which are Fabric data agents, to further kind of advance our natural language interface abilities. We'll talk about what those are. We'll show off a an example of one, and then even talk about how you can consume those in various places throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. So, any quick questions kind of before we get started here? Again, please raise your hand if you've got anything. If not, just some brief background stuff as we get into this. So, as I mentioned before, the problem we're trying to solve here is there's a lot of data spread around a lot of different places. If you're like a lot of organizations that have gotten going with Power BI, it's made to be a self-service tool. So what has happened, what we're seeing a lot in our client portfolio is organizations have adopted Power BI. Workspaces have been created. Different people in the organization have started to create reports, and associated with those reports are often data sets. Semantic models, I guess, is the more recent term, and it can be it's become very spread out. I used the word chaotic a little earlier. There's a lot of information out there, not necessarily all formatted kind of the way it needs to be, or consolidated and governed properly. So trying to find what information we need across the organization can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. And as more and more content gets created, and in some cases created and kind of abandoned even, there's a lot floating around a lot of organizations' Power BI tenants. So the needle in a haystack analogy applies here. The problem statement or the issue we're trying to solve here is, what if we could just ask the data question, right? In that chat GPT kind of format, without having to know what report we need or what workspace or what the proper, we're not writing syntax here, we're not writing SQL code. Although we'll talk about how the agent kind of does some of that type of work behind the scenes, but to just be able to ask it naturally a question and then just kind of chat back and forth with our data. So that's what Copilot tries to solve for us here. So we're going to talk first about, and I say talk, this is going to be a lot of demo here. I've only got 14 or 15 slides, it looks like. So we're going to go back and forth with the environment. So we're going to do a lot of hands-on. But I wanted to start by just walking through a couple of the out-of-the-box interfaces that are available in Power BI or Fabric today. So let's take a look over at one of my sample workspaces. So again, this is a sample workspace. The only thing you'll notice here is that it is backed by a Fabric capacity. We'll get into the licensing requirements in a few more slides, but I've got some very rudimentary report, or a rudimentary report out here that we're going to start by opening that up. Oops, that was the wrong one. The report is what I wanted. And again, if you're in a workspace and it's backed by Fabric capacity, you should see the Copilot button up here at the top. If you're not in a Copilot or not in a Fabric backed workspace, this is either going to be grayed out or just not visible up there at all. But if you click on that, you're going to get kind of a familiar Copilot sidebar that pops up. You'll be able to ask some questions about your data. It recommends a few or give you some suggestions about what you might want to ask here to begin with. We can just do something very simple, like what were sales in 2015? And it's going to think on that for a second. I think it seems like the first time you ask it a question, it has to kind of go and load up the data, so it's a little slower. But again, you've got a few examples of questions you might ask. You can ask it to give you a kind of a summary of the existing report, kind of try to pull out insights on its own. You'll get varying levels of success with some of those kind of questions. What's important to note here is a couple things. We have not, at this point, done anything to kind of, again, we'll go through some steps in a moment to kind of prepare a semantic model for AI. We have not really done any of those things at this point, or you do not have to do any of those things at this point. You'll see this and have this Copilot functionality available, again, right out of the box for every report within a workspace that's backed by a capacity. And then two, much like a report in Power BI. A report, as you may know, has to be tied to a single semantic model. And that's the case here for Copilot as well. Any responses you get from Copilot in this experience are going to be tied to the semantic model backed by this report. So we'll talk about experiences in a bit that can go beyond a single semantic model. But for the purposes of what we're looking at here, what we call kind of the traditional Copilot experience, or kind of the sidebar Copilot experience, the report Copilot experience, you can kind of go by a number of names. You are limited to just the context of this existing report. So we asked it a question, and it did thought about it for a second, and it came back with the response. Now you're going to get this is a large language model, a chat interface, and so I'm sure that you've in some of your experience in playing with these or using them on a day-to-day basis, you will note that the response that you get is not always going to be the same. And what I mean by that is that if I ask this question again or ask it tomorrow, I'm likely to not get the exact same formatted answer. I'm hoping that that the numbers should stay consistent. If the data stays consistent, again, there's always a caveat with large language models, and that it understands the data the way you're asking it. But behind the scenes, what it's doing, and we'll get more into this as we go through this, it's turning your question, your natural language question, understanding it, and then essentially applying a translation filter that translates it, the question you're asking, into DAX code that it can execute against our semantic model. So the results, as long as it understands the question correctly, the results that it gets, the numbers it gets, if it's writing the DAX correctly, should be consistent with the model. So that is that's experience number one here, the out of the box, the right pane Copilot experience, and this should be available, as I said, on every. We've got multiple reports here, pages within this little kind of dummy report. You're going to see that across the board here. So that's number one. The second option that is a little newer, that has been added within maybe the last 6 to 8 months, is this, what they're calling the standalone Copilot experience. And this is kind of at the top level within your Power BI environment now. And it differs from the right pane built-in Copilot experience in a couple of important ways. One, it's focused a bit more on finding the right information across your environment. As I said, the one that we looked at previously was focused on or really limited to the context of the existing report. This one goes across your organization and should have access to everything, again, trimmed based on your own security. So everything that you as a user have access to, all the reports and workspaces, it should be aware of all of those. And so it can not only have access to all those and allow you to write queries or make requests of all of those different data stores, if you want to think of them that way. It can also help you find things, like if you're looking for a specific report, you can ask it questions like that. And provide summaries, as it says here. So we'll talk about this one in a moment here, but let's pop back over there and maybe show you where this is at, because this one, if you're like me and go into Power BI and kind of ignore a lot of what's over here and just focus on your workspaces, you should all see, again, if you have a Fabric capacity and are supported here, you should see a Copilot button up at the top. When you come into Power BI natively, you might get dropped in this home page. It's similar kind of right here at the top, and this is similar to the others. We're going to give you some examples of the kind of queries you can ask it. You can ask help it define a report about a topic, as I mentioned before, and then you can also get in and ask it the same kind of questions that we're asking of the individual model. And let's just show you an example here of what for sales. I'm going to ask the same question, and we're going to see what kind of response we get. So again, the big difference here is that this can work across multiple semantic models, and in my case, I've got probably 100 semantic models across our organization that I have access to, if not more than that. It's going to take a second to try to figure this out. Now, this is maybe also it's smart enough in a lot of cases to figure out um, what you may be asking. Now, in this case, it's going to say, I wasn't sure. Let's see if I can tell me which report that you want to reference. You have a couple options there. You can just name it. You can hit this little plus button and you'll see what's available across your organization. You can search for those. I'm going to reference specifically this wide world importers, which is the one that we looked at a moment ago. And let's just tell it that's the one that I want. Um, in this environment, again, very, very similar to the kind of Copilot or ChatGPT experiences that you may have become used to. One of the real strengths of this is it's context awareness. So once you ask a question of it, it can reference its questions, the questions and responses that it's previously answered within this session. So once we told it what we wanted to look at, then it was smart enough to say, okay, there's the breakdown. In fact, it even goes and shows me a bar chart of what was there. You can go and view this. In fact, this is I'll show you how we did this in a moment, because this is what we call a verified answer that we're going to set up here in a minute. But it'll link this back to the report. You can explore the answer by clicking in here and giving you kind of a developer mode if you want to kind of come in here and play with your visual. So you've got some options right out of the box here. So again, the big difference between the sidebar Copilot and this one is that it's able to access all of the semantic models that you have across your environment. Now, and maybe importantly, what it can't really do, or not really effectively do, is join or answer questions that maybe go across multiple ones. Although I could just as easily switch in my next question to reference a different semantic model in a different workspace. And you can try your best to have Copilot kind of keep track of what answers are coming from which, but there's no native kind of behind the scenes in terms of what it's doing. Again, right now we asked this question, it's converting this to DAX and running the query. It's not able to do anything as advanced as running a DAX query that would somehow span multiple semantic models. And again, and discoverability is the other thing here for the Copilot, what we call the standalone Copilot experience, allow you to navigate across your organization. Now, what you didn't see here, and what I wanted to talk about, was this notion of there's a flag you can put on a semantic model that indicates that it's prepped for AI. It's really nothing more than that. It's just that it's truly a flag. There are no checks in place there, but you can flag individual semantic models as prepped for AI. And then further, what you can do is you can, in your tenant settings, you can flag the environment or say that for the standalone Copilot experience, I only want to be able to query or really talk about the models that have actually gone through that process, or I shouldn't say go through the process, that have been flagged as prep for AI. And in larger organizations, I would recommend that as best case. I mean, the danger of something like this is that if you've got an environment that has a dev and a test version of various workspaces that you're working on behind the scenes, this is probably more true of kind of your developer set than your end users. In this environment, it can sometimes be hard for Copilot to differentiate between the two. So by flagging maybe just the production set as prep for AI, after maybe you've gone through a few of the other steps that we're about to show off, you would limit Copilot's access to those non-prepped for AI workspaces, or I'm sorry, non-prepped for AI semantic models in your environment. So we'll show you what that looks like here in a moment. And I think the only reason that we didn't see that here, because I didn't think I had this one flagged, if you have a model that's not prepped for AI, in fact, you'll notice one thing, you'll get the little standard disclaimer about AI generated content may be incorrect. If you are referencing a model that is not flagged as prep for AI, you'll also typically get a warning when you ask it a question, and it'll prompt you. It'll say, this model has not been flagged as prep for AI. Would you still like to use this model to answer the question? And you'd have to kind of give it a yay or a nay. And I think the only reason we didn't see that for my query here is I was testing this out earlier and had already told it yes. So those are the couple options and maybe some best practice in terms of how to use that. Any other questions about what that looks like before I move into kind of how we go through some of the prep for AI content? All right, let me jump back to a quick slide here, overview. So again, what we looked at right now is kind of the out of the box. There's nothing you need to do necessarily, but if you want to be able to tune these to get better results and maybe direct Copilot to be a better agent to answer these kind of questions, these few other options are available. So one of the analogies that you may have heard or read as you've gotten into Copilot or some of these experiences, Microsoft likes to characterize a data agent or an AI agent specifically as a new college hire, someone that is conversant in our case, in data, knows how to do data analysis, but is very green in terms of knowledge about data in your business. So the process of prepping or training an AI agent for your data is much like onboarding a new hire. You're teaching them where to find information, how do we calculate profit margin in our organization? How does data from system A relate to system B? Those are the kinds of information that you can think about when you're training a model. So this is the interface. We'll jump right back over into and where you get to that is if we jump back into a workspace and specifically a semantic model. So this is our associated semantic model of wide world importers. We'll open that up, and up here in the top, there's a button that says Prep Data for AI. You may have seen this also in Power BI Desktop. I think the experience there is very similar. We're just going to do it online here today. If we click that, you're going to see that screen that I had screenshotted there a moment ago. And we've got three things that you can do kind of in this UI that will help Copilot better understand and provide better answers. So we'll start with the first one, Simplify Data Schema. This one's pretty straightforward. You're going to see, when you select this, you're going to see all of the tables that are in your semantic model. This just allows you to remove or maybe better focus Copilot's answers on only the tables and or columns that you want it to be able to reference, or really maybe not reference, but that you want it to answer questions based on. So in my case, this is a really basic semantic model based on a kind of demo data set. And as you may be able to tell here, it was generated by taking really a select all from these 6 or 7 tables. And there wasn't a lot of thought put into structuring the Power BI model. So we see a lot of stuff here. This is a person table that it's not really useful from an analytics standpoint. Someone's fax number is a good example. There aren't many reports that you need, or many types of analysis that you need to do where you would group people by fax number or something like that. So that may be a good one to remove. You could certainly make the argument that it doesn't even have any place in the semantic model as a whole, and that brings up another good point in terms of best practice. The more work you can do to structure your semantic model in a way that treats the semantic model itself as a data product, as opposed to, I think what Power BI has gotten people maybe in a bad habit of, is treating the Power BI reports and dashboards as the data product. And people, especially kind of your citizen developers, don't put much time into structuring the semantic model in a way that makes it easy and friendly for users to use. Again, think about the agent here as a new hire. If you're overloading this model, semantic model, with lots of fields that aren't really relevant, and it's just harder to understand. So this is just a way to winnow down the the available data for the agent and just focus on what's important. So you can select or unselect all the appropriate things and go ahead and apply those changes. Secondly, we'll move over to verified answers. Trying to move the verified answers. I'm not sure why those aren't coming up. I had some in here, so that's why. Oh, maybe it's still applying my changes very slowly. Well, as we wait for this, verified answers are a way to tell the agent exactly how you would like it to respond to common questions. So if you're finding people are frequently asking what the sales were for a particular product category or just byproduct category, and want to be able to provide some better consistency in the types of answers the agent will give, verified answers is your way to do that. Verified answers are actually, we just view them here, but I'll show you where we create. Maybe I can, this is just not going to cooperate with me. They're actually created from a report. So as you have reports created against this model, and you have maybe a specific visual on one of those reports, you can click on the visual and say, I want to make this a verified, I want to get this visual should be the verified answer if someone asks this question or these set of questions. You can give it multiple questions and it will list it as a verified answer, and it should use that to inform its answers when those kind of questions are asked. I'm going to skip this one since it's still stuck here, and we'll just move over to the AI instruction. I'll try to circle back on the verified answers and show you what that looks like or how those are created. Oh, there it finally goes. Still not sure. Well, let me just show you what that looks like. So if we go back to our report, oops. And if you're in edit mode of a report, you do need to be in edit mode. So you need to be an editor in the environment. You'll see one of the options here. If you click on a visual, you'll see set up a verified answer. When you do that, I've done something to this model it's not liking. What it should do is should show you the snapshot of that visual over here, and then give you first, I think it'll start by giving you a couple suggested verified answers that it would respond to, and you could type in a few others, and you can add again a list of, I don't know what the limit is, but 3, 4, 5 different questions that those that visual should respond with, or the agent should respond with that visual. So again, apologize that doesn't seem to be cooperating right now. The third one in our tool set here is the ability to add AI instructions. And that is very open-ended. So the first two were pretty prescriptive and targeted. This AI instruction, and if anyone's ever trained a ChatGPT, a kind of a custom agent in ChatGPT or something similar, where you can give it a lot of instructions about kind of how you want the agent to act and behave and what kind of questions you want it to give, or answers you want it to give. We have really kind of an open-ended instruction here. So I've just given it a couple basic pieces of information here. One is in our model, the metric is just called invoice amount. But what I'm telling the agent is anytime someone asks about sales, what were sales, that we're going to reference that invoice amount. And there are a couple other ways to do this in Power BI in a kind of a previous iteration that's still there, by the way. There's a concept of synonyms in Power BI, and that would be a good way to do this as well. So you can put a synonym in the measure for Power BI that would put sales. But again, this is a very open-ended place to put pretty much anything you could think of, or any advice that you want to give the agent in terms of how to respond. This one's a little more specific, and I just kind of carved out a specific example here of of how I want the agent to respond. So when they're talking about sales, I'm telling it unless the user specifically asks for all the sales, then it should kind of by default ignore customers that have head office in the name, with the notion that those are kind of internal sales that are happening and shouldn't be counted, generally speaking. And we'll see how the agent kind of responds in that, or the agent in Copilot responds with that in mind typically. So you can add as many of these as you like. Well, I guess not as many. You've got a 10,000 character limit, but you could add quite a few. Um, and you've got a lot of latitude in terms of what kind of instructions you give it here. Now, best practice again is to push as much of this upstream as you can. So it still behooves you to have a well structured model to again maybe not bring forward a lot of columns and fields that aren't necessary, to have good relationships built in your model, to have friendly names built in your model. As we'll show here in a minute, have maybe some descriptions, etc. But this just gives you one more place where you can give it some more information. Yeah. So last couple best practices here we already talked about with the selecting columns, but again, the ability to or the recommendation is to prepare your model or structure your model in a way that you've given it friendly names, and again those relationships there. Again, think of your model itself as a data product and not just the reporting that comes out of it. If you think of it along those lines and really structure it in a way that you're trying to keep it as simple and straightforward for end users to understand, an agent is just another end user, sophisticated end user, but still needs to be able to understand the information. Let me show you a couple other tricks here. You can actually use Copilot now to generate some descriptions for the model itself. So if I jump back over into the model, I'm going to open it up here in edit mode in the browser. You can, if we go into, I don't have very many measures in this, but I have a simple measure here. So this is a very straightforward sum measure here. But what you'll see for calculated measures in Power BI is you'll get this create with Copilot. This will have Copilot take a look at the DAX that you've written behind this measure. And in some cases, the measures can get pretty complicated, which is where this really becomes useful. You can hit this create with Copilot button. It'll go and take a look at what the calculation's doing, and it'll come up with a little summary. It says in this case, it calculates it by summing the extended price field from blah, blah, blah. So we'll keep that. We'll put it in here. It'll write that. Again, these description fields are on all of the columns in your model. It does not have the ability to go figure out what internal comments means. That's a very specific thing to your organization. But the more information you can give it about what this information or what the data in your model is for, the better answers you're going to get out of the back end. But getting it to go through and create descriptions for all of your DEX queries can be both beneficial as well as help speed it up, because if you don't give it that kind of information, that's the kind of thing that's going to have to figure out on its own every time someone queries the model. So you can do that on a measure by measure basis. You can also, if you want to get into it, there's ways to script that. So there's a process that'll go through your entire model and run it through Copilot and add all these descriptions for you to help you out there. So that's one other option. The marking as prep for AI is something else that we talked about, but I just want to show you briefly what that looks like. That's also going to be in the settings for your semantic model. So if you go to the settings, you'll see a bunch of options down here. One of the ones is going to be approved for Copilot. So you'll notice the little context there, but essentially it's just a flag. It's going to tell people that this model has been approved for Copilot now. Without any guardrails, literally anybody that owns a semantic model can come in here and flag theirs as approved for Copilot. So my suggestion would be to put some guardrails up around that. This is a tenant setting. So you can set a subset, or you can select a subset of people that would have the ability to approve a model for Copilot. So whether that's some kind of a governance process where you have a review board, or leave that to your Fabric administrator or administrators, that if someone wants to flag one for a Copilot, they need to kind of come to you, and you can have a checklist to make sure that they've actually gone through maybe some of the steps we talked about. Doing so in combination with, so approving it for Copilot in combination with the tenant setting that would only surface approved semantic models in the standalone Copilot experience, is going to cut down significantly on a lot of just the slop that's floating around your organization. The sample data and test data and all that kind of stuff that would kind of potentially overwhelm, or certainly make it harder for that standalone Copilot experience that has access to the wider environment to be useful. So those would both be recommendations. And then just the recommendation to just test responses. We've played with a couple of different ways to tune these models for Copilot, and just using either the standalone Copilot experience or or even just the right pane one, and just ask a bunch of questions, and try to get the responses lined up the way you want. If you see some things coming out of the agent that are not what you expect, you can do a number, take any one of those actions that we talked about, whether it's providing additional AI instructions, creating some new verified answers, etc., until you get the kind of responses out of it that you'd expect. And that's probably going to be an ongoing thing. If you continue to test it, if you hear reports that people are getting weird answers out of it, then you can continue to tweak and tune as you go. Just quickly talk about licensing stuff. We talked briefly about this, but first of all, you need to enable. There's a handful of options in the Fabric admin portal related to Copilot. It needs to be enabled first of all, and then for these semantic models to be accessible to an agent, it needs to be in a Fabric. The workspace needs to be supported by a Fabric capacity. Now they've taken that down, and when they rolled this out a year or so ago, it was only the big capacities, the F64s and higher, were able to do this work. But now they've taken it all the way down to the lowest level. You can get started with a Fabric capacity in Power BI now for as low as that F2 capacity is a couple $100s a month, so it's pretty low end. There's also trials out there that they're very generous with. So. But if you're just in a regular workspace, a pro workspace, or even a premium per user workspace, if that's the way you're licensed, you're not going to see some of those Copilot buttons, or I think they may be grayed out. If that's what you're experiencing, this is what you're missing, almost certainly, unless, again, you'll need to enable it as well. Just a little note quickly about what this means. So in a Fabric capacity, of course, this is a shared capacity environment. So when you provision a capacity, there's a certain amount of resources that your all the associated workspaces that are tied to that capacity have to share, and that's across the board, from running simple reports to refreshing semantic models to running ETL processes that may load lake houses, et cetera, et cetera. They're all shared resources, and that the agent or the Copilot usage is just another workload that consumes resources in that environment. To really get inside baseball on you, it converts your queries into tokens and et cetera. What's important to note is that if you ask it more complex, multi-step kind of logical or thinking problems, it's going to consume more tokens and consume more of your capacity. These are charged to the workspace that hosts those capacities, unless you specify otherwise. And they have rolled out the ability now to have all of your Copilot usage kind of across the organization funnel into a specific, kind of Copilot only capacity. And that makes a lot of sense if you really see adoption here. The reason being that if you leave it in the kind of default mode and it uses the workspace capacity rather, and you have other workloads, let's say you have a big nightly ETL process that runs in this workspace, but if people are out hammering away on this workspace or this semantic model during the day with Copilot usage, it may consume a lot of those resources. You get to the point of running your ETL, and your ETL is hindered or fails because you don't have any capacity resources left. Copilot usage, kind of by design, is going to be very irregular and hard to predict. So if you throw it over into its own workspace, consume it there, the worst thing that would happen would be that you run out of OpenAI tokens during a day, and people are unable to um, ask some of these kind of questions. Any questions about everyone's favorite topic, licensing, before I move on to the last little bit? Good. All right, because Fabric Data Agents is what I really wanted to make sure we had time to show off. These are the ability to really take the work we've done to prep these things and to kind of tune the answers and take them a step further and be able to expose them in a variety of different ways. So very similar to what you get in the out-of-the-box Copilot, these are a way to create conversational AI experts. The difference here being, and the very important difference, is that you can create a data agent that has access to more than just a single semantic model. So it's smart enough to go across data sets to answer multi-step questions. And I'll show one off in a moment. But everything we've done so far has looked at a semantic model. But you can also now pull in information from other Fabric data sources like a lakehouse or a warehouse. KQL databases are their real-time database structure. So if you've got real-time data streaming into your Fabric environment, you can query that. So those are those other Fabric data sets are what's accessible here. So you may have kind of your core reporting semantic model available for Power BI reports, but some of the real low-level data or detailed data may be back in your lakehouse. So an agent here might be able to start at the high level and then go to the lakehouse for some granular data if you want to go that route. What this does is it guarantees the context. So you structure which data sources it has access to. You can have up to 5 in any combination data sources right now as part of an agent. So it guarantees the context, and unlike maybe the standalone where you're kind of trying to figure out which model it might go against. When you structure it as an agent, we've already done that work. It says accuracy. It certainly improves accuracy by that. There's still the kind of the caveat that it's still a large language model, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's seamless integration with Copilot. We'll show you a couple different ways that you can then take these agents and consume them in other places. And in terms of the difference versus what we've already looked at, the Copilot, as I mentioned, the real difference is the ability to merge together multiple types of data from different data stores. So let's look real quickly about what that looks like. Back in our workspace, I've got a data agent. You can create those just like you can create anything else by just going to the new and selecting data agent in there. Those are still in preview, although I think I would expect these could come out of preview very shortly. They've been in preview for a while now. But rather than create a new one, I'm just going to open up the one we already have. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight here. So you'll see the data sources. So one of the data sources is just that same semantic model that we've already been looking at. It's called the wide world importers, and we've got a handful of tables in there. Now, even similar to the interface before, you can further select what tables you want this agent to pay attention to. And in our case, I'm really focused on, well, as you'll see here in a moment, I'm really focused on these application people, which is our salesperson table. And then just the sales information from the invoice lines. So I've got that information in the semantic model, but I've also layered in here a very simple lakehouse that's in this workspace. Although again, that doesn't have to be in this workspace; it could be somewhere else in Fabric. And this lakehouse contains a single table. This table just has some information about quotas for salespeople. I don't have any. I've got sales information here in my main semantic model, but I don't have any information about the quotas for those. So we can do some target versus actual kind of comparisons. So I've added those as both data sources. You can just do that by adding a data source. This gives you access to everything in your Fabric environment that you have access to, and then you go and give it some instructions. So just high level, you give it agent instructions. So you kind of tell it what the objective of this agent is, kind of can tell it what kind of questions it should be asking or answering rather. You can describe the data sources. This is kind of a suggested layout here, and I haven't filled in a lot of this information for this model. But it would certainly behoove you to give it as much information as you can. And then you can tell it what kind of topics you want it to answer. So in my case, I'm telling it when it's asked about quotas for a salesperson, get the quota amount from the AI demo, which is this quota table, and then get the salesperson name from the application people table in the wide world importer. So you'll notice here that I just have an ID value here, and then that maps to an ID value over here. In fact, that's what I even tell it. Salesperson ID from quotas joins to the person ID in the application people. And so I can give it more information. You can go on and on with these as well. This being a lake house as opposed to a semantic model, you've got even more instructions to give it since it doesn't really know much about the data, unlike a semantic model, which is already nicely structured data, and it knows things about the relationships based on what you already set up in the semantic model. But here for the AI demo, you'll have the ability to create additional data source instructions, and that's what we've done here. This is just markup language stuff. So we give it some general knowledge about what this is. We describe the tables that are involved here. And so I've laid out the table name and the columns and told it what it is and how it's formatted. And then, have given it some example questions when asked about this, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've given it enough information to understand what kind of questions it should respond to and how it should respond to those. For example, when asked about a salesperson, always return the full name, and the full name is actually going to come from the table in the other model. So this is where you start to see the power of this, right? We've got data in two different data sources in our Fabric environment, and we're having this agent be able to be smart enough to kind of go across data sources and in a multi-step process answer these questions. And so I think I had, let's see, rather than wait for it to answer these, I'll just show you a few that I asked it earlier. So I asked in terms of testing the agent's response. So after you've set all this up, you can go in here and you've got a list of sample ones, or you can have some test ones over here. I'm going to let's focus on this one over here. So I asked it who had the highest quota for 2015. And it thought for a second, for 17 seconds, and it responded with Amy Trepel had the highest quota for 2015 with a quota of 568,000. Now, response is great. What's really interesting is you can kind of see how it thinks through this process. So it says the first thing it did is it shows me the highest quota amount for the corresponding salesperson ID for 2015. So this is a query. It goes and it'll show you the SQL query that it wrote against the lake house. So it says the top one, and what you're going to output from this is a salesperson ID 7, quote amount 768,000. But to figure out who salesperson ID 7 is, we need to jump over into the other data source, the semantic model in this case. And so we come down here. So salesperson, show me the name of the salesperson with person ID 7. So it figures out that that's what it was, figures out what data source it needs to go to answer that question. And then in this case, since it's a semantic model, it's going to write a DAX query to find the one that has the person ID 7. The output is Amy Treffel. And then the agent combines those two things and gives you a nice friendly answer up here that Amy Treffel had the highest quota. You could certainly go on from there. I think I've got a question down here about kind of who are the top 5 salespeople, and then it kind of does iterates even further. You've got, well, in fact, this case, it had multiple steps to figure all that stuff out. So not only can you, as you're testing it, you can kind of test the results, but you can kind of think or see the thinking that went on as part of that as well. So if there's any modifications to that, you can do that along the way. I know I'm about out of time. So once you have one of these, you publish it. And then you can interact with this in a number of ways. You can interact with a data agent directly in the Power BI environments, or even right up here in Copilot. You can reference a data agent and ask it questions here in a standalone environment. But where this really gets useful is where you can extend these to. You can take these out to Copilot Studio. in that environment if anyone's worked there, but that gives you the ability to create agents that would use really these the Fabric data agents as what they call kind of a knowledge store or knowledge source in Copilot Studio to ask or to answer questions, and then within Copilot Studio or even the Azure AI Foundry services or Studio, you could layer multiple agents and even agents from other places. So agents from other places across the Copilot environment, and create agents that would use maybe our Fabric agent to answer questions about our data, and then have other agents that would act upon that data in other places in our organization. You can embed those directly in the Copilot experience within Fabric, or not within Fabric, within just Office 365 Copilot, and make these agents available there. And then you could even embed them directly into something like Teams once they're exposed in that method. So you could have an agent that sits in Teams, and people could respond or interact with your data, ask questions there. So not even requiring them to go into something like the Power BI portal. So I know that was a lot. I rushed through it. We've got a couple minutes left. Any questions here before we go? And I'm happy to stick around for another few minutes if there are any kind of final questions before we
Hey,
wrap.
Gary, John had a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Isn't available and embedded, but have you heard anything suggesting MS is going to make that available there? I have not, and so the embedded capacities are a bit of a leftover. As you may know, Power BI or Microsoft has moved most of the old Power BI capacities into this new Fabric model. The embedded, I'm not sure exactly what the plans are for those, because those are still kind of legacy capacity models. But there would be, I think you do have the ability maybe to spin up maybe a dedicated Copilot capacity, although I'm not sure how that would work with models that are maybe stored in the embedded model. John, that's something I can do a little research into, and we're on a couple of panels with Microsoft and have some information behind the scenes. So let me see if I can figure out or find any information about what they may be planning for those. Generally speaking, though, as you might imagine, they're trying to push this Copilot into every corner of the organization they can. So it wouldn't surprise me if they've got plans to figure out how to bring it to that environment. Or maybe more accurately, I wouldn't be surprised if they've got plans to migrate those old embedded capacities into something more Fabric centric in the future. All right. Any other questions?
Gary, you'd also talked a little bit about connecting to other data sources, but kind of the ones you showed were still kind of in a Microsoft environment. Is it possible to connect it to other things? How far outside that kind of core can you get? Can we get into Azure? You say the Foundry services, but like Synapse Studio, can we connect to that? Or if we had Snowflake, would we be able to connect to repositories there?
It right now is confined to only items in your Fabric environment. Fabric, and so Fabric entities like semantic models, lake houses, and I think it's just those four that I've mentioned right now. There's not a ability in here to add a connection string, that kind of stuff. So it is going to be contained really within Fabric. I mean, if you have some of those other data assets outside of Fabric, I think Microsoft's guidance would be to, and they've put a lot into their mirroring technology over the last couple of years. So their suggestion there would probably be to mirror that data over into a Fabric lakehouse or a mirrored Fabric database of some kind of something like that. But I would not, and I'm not aware of any plans in the near future to expand those data sources to be outside of Fabric. I think there'd be important implications just in terms of the performance and being able to keep everything from an AI perspective kind of under the same roof. So
another question is how, in your experience, how does Copilot deal with kind of complicated layering of measures? Things like we work with shipping data here, so we have 12 dates attached to one shipment, when it was shipped, when it was delivered, when it was processed, things like that. And so we obviously have a separate date table to have one date that controls them all, but then write measures that filter through those using the use relationship function.
Yeah.
And then we also combine that with things that convert currencies.
Yeah.
Is
I know you've got
Copilot
some
able?
complicated models.
Yes, we do.
Um,
But how is Copilot doing with things that are complicated like that, or that require, at least in the Power BI report version, require a user selection to tell them, which date version to use, which currency to use?
Yeah, I think that's where some of your AI instructions are going to come in really handy. The more information that you can give it in terms of how to respond, there's going to be a lot of back and forth testing of some of those, just to make sure that it can understand that, as you said, the multi-layered approach that some of your metrics are built. Whether you can get there or not, I'm not entirely sure. I can't say for certain that I've tried to layer Copilot on maybe a model quite as as complex as the one that you're referring to, at least from my experience in working with it a couple years back. So I would just suggest, right, if you have access to these tools and you can start to create, I think maybe something even like one of these agents where you can really get in depth in terms of the kind of instructions that you give it will be helpful. But I imagine there's going to be a lot of trial and error, a lot of testing that would need to go into that, and it may even behoove you to create either more simplistic versions of some of those measures specifically for the purpose of AI, if that's possible, or even a few more smaller, maybe targeted models that might be able to answer subsets of the kind of questions. It might be that instead of one big model that you have now, that we have two or three smaller ones that we could kind of combine within an agent to respond to certain types of questions. And again, that's probably a good point. I would suggest that that you not try to define these agents in a way that, this is our enterprise warehouse and this knows everything about our organization. And it can answer any question you have about our data. I think as the kind of the attempts to boil the ocean are going to be difficult there. So the more targeted you can make these, and maybe have one that responds to questions about our invoices, and have another one that responds to questions about our HR data or something like that, right? You're going to find that can be a better approach than trying to create a larger one that has access to a big chunk of data. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I thank you guys for your time today. If you do think of other questions after the fact, please reach out, and I'll just wrap up here with just an offer for a couple of ways to kind of get started on this. We can certainly come out, and we're always happy to do what we just call lunch and learns that don't always have to be around lunch necessarily. But to just do a deep dive here, a deeper dive on the kind of topics we talked about today, and talk about maybe within the context of your organization. And then a great way to get started here. Again, my assumption is that everyone on the call today has at least been using Power BI and probably Power BI for a while now. I don't know how far along, or if anyone's dipped their toes into kind of the full Fabric ecosystem and kind of evolving Power BI and what that looks like. We're certainly happy to help you get started with that. We've done a number of engagements with clients over the last year, 6 months, as people have become more excited about Fabric, to just help them kind of get a template out there for what we think is best practice in terms of creating an analytic environment in Fabric with lake houses and kind of in a medallion architecture. So we're happy to kind of get started on something like that as well. And then if you're interested in specifically just evolving your semantic models in a way to kind of prep them for AI and some of these agents, we're happy to have those conversations with you. We've got a multidiscipline team that can take you all the way through from the data parts that we talked about today, in terms of and then all the way through to the integration of this into your teams and modern work environments. So let us know how we can help. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And please, again, reach out if you have questions.